Hello, comrades. Today we're talking about Art Spiegelman's 1991 five-star classic, The Complete Mouse. And for those of you who don't know what this book is about, it's Art Spiegelman interviewing his father and who survived the Holocaust. And he depicts his memories, the interviews of his father and the memories of his father in this interesting comic book, graphic novel format where the Jews are mice, the Poles are pigs, and the Germans are cats. And it's, I think, the only graphic novel to ever win the Pulitzer Prize. It's really highly acclaimed. And I had a lot of trouble kind of thinking about what I wanted to say about this book because it really is just kind of telling a story of this man's father and his life and the relationship between them. But there's something interesting because people obviously they use this book to talk about the Holocaust a lot in schools, and there was one school district that banned it from the school libraries, took it off the curriculum, and we can actually look at their reasoning. They had a meeting with notes with minutes, and we can read through their minutes. And so we have this guy Tony Allman, and I don't know who this man is. He's a real person. I don't want to demonize him or anything, but he seems to be the real kind of driving force against this book, kind of wanting to ban it. And he's the one who kind of opens up the minutes, opens up the meeting, and he wants to know if there's a substitute. Because they all know why they're here. They're here because this book contains 8 bad words. I believe they were a bitch and a goddamn, and one very crude drawing of a naked woman. And so they think it's not safe, it's not age appropriate for, I believe it was 8th graders, so 13-year-olds. And so at the end, they do, of course, get rid of the book. They take it off the curriculum, and they don't find a substitute for it. If they were just banning it from the school libraries, I think I'd understand it a little bit more. But no, this is like the cornerstone. They call it an anchor book in the curriculum. It's very important. They're just like, nah, we're getting rid of that, and figuring out what to do instead will be a future problem. So that is the answer to his question. There is no substitute. That is the context in which they are having this meeting. They want to get rid of this book because it's really important to their curriculum despite not having a substitute. The next thing that Tony Allman says is that it's an 8th grade book on a 3rd grade reading level, which seems to be an attack on its value as an educational piece for learning. So it is easier to read just in terms of the language that is used in the words. But someone actually pushes back on this and says that's incorrect. Although it might be easier to read, it is considered an 8th grade reading level just because it's complicated. There's a difference between understanding the literal words in the sentence and being able to interpret the deeper meaning and themes of a book and kind of placing it into a broader context, which is something, ironically enough, I think the school board failed to do. And so they have censored it to a certain extent. They have the beginning of the word, so they have like the first word, the letter of the word, and then the rest of it will be whited out, and then they can't get rid of the image because of copyright issues. And so Tony Allman goes on, and he says, and I quote, "It shows people hanging, it shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It's not wise or healthy." And I think that's a really interesting objection because I think it shows a deeper flaw in the decision to take this off the curriculum, that they couldn't place it in that broader context. They couldn't do what the kids would have to do. They couldn't see that even though it was depicting violence, and I think there are some darker moments that you might think were maybe just too much, too strong, too dramatic for a student. And I would understand that, but they really do seem a lot of times focused on the specific words that are used in that one specific image. And so one of the other members, Julie Gordon, pushes back on that, and she says the words are objectionable, but the history is important, which is something they all kind of give lip service to. They all say, oh yeah, of course, teaching the history is important, but this book isn't necessarily a part of that. There's this quote from Melissa Knight, and it's, quote, "I think anytime you're teaching something from history, people did hang from trees, people did commit suicide, and people were killed. Over 6 million were murdered. I think the author is portraying that because it is a true story about his father, that lived through that. He is trying to portray that the best he can with the language that he chooses that would relate to the time. Maybe to help people who haven't been in that aspect in time to actually relate to the horrors of it. Is the language objectionable? Sure. I think that is how he uses that language to portray that. And so I think this is another really interesting kind of defense of the book. So there seem to be kind of two aspects of this. One is that the language is bad, that the situation itself is terrible, so it kind of justifies the usage of that language. But also there's this interesting point I think they're trying to make that it somehow was more appropriate in the time, which if anything I think is less true. I think words like goddamn and bitch have become more acceptable with time, not less. And so we go back to Tony Allen. He's like, okay, yeah, but can't we just censor it? You know, he's like, if we have a movie and we just cut out some of the bad words or like a sex scene for TV, it's still the same movie. And I think beyond the copyright laws, you know, they spend a lot of time talking about the copyright issues around this, around changing someone else's creative work. I think there is a real kind of problem with that, of really kind of missing the point, is that the bad language in this book isn't unnecessary. It's a specific artistic choice to use that language. And thinking, why did the author choose to use this language, I think could be really helpful in interpreting it and understanding the full context. So next up we have Mike Cochran, and Mike Cochran says, quote, "We were talking about teaching ethics to our kids, and it starts out with the dad and the son talking about when the dad lost his virginity. It wasn't explicit, but it was in there. You see the naked pictures, you see the razor, the blade where the mom is cutting herself, you see her lying in a pool of her own blood. You have all this stuff in here. Again, reading this to myself, it was a decent book until the end. I thought the end was stupid, to be honest with you." And so there are two things there. One, I would really like to know what about the end of this book he thought was stupid. Like, how else could he have ended? It's like his father, you know, escaped the Holocaust, went to America, he eventually died. It feels like there's not really a lot of artistic room to change the ending, and I feel like he might have missed something important about the book. I don't know why he thought the end was stupid. And the next thing is this weird kind of conflation of things. So on the one hand, we have the dad talking about, you know, being with a woman, and he doesn't say it explicitly. And then actually they address this in the book, where the father says, "Oh, don't put this in the book." And Art Spiegelman says, "No, this humanizes you. You know, like, it makes you more of a person. It explains some of the backsetting. This is important." And so it's such a weird case where something is so well defended within the book itself that someone else might come and say, "Oh, that was unnecessary." And so the next kind of set of things that they're objecting to here is the moment where they find the mother who'd killed herself. And I understand objecting to exposing that to children, you know, too early. There is a certain amount of thought you have to put into what really is age appropriate. But the way they were talking about it, they focus so much on the nudity and the specific graphics of that one scene, which feels kind of brazen in the context of the greater Holocaust. There's so many terrible moments in this book, and it's hard to understand why that was the one that they really objected to. So Mike Cochran continues, I think this is another kind of funny objection to the book. He says, "A lot of the cussing had to do with the son cussing out the father, so I don't really know how that teaches our kids any kind of ethical stuff. It's just the opposite. Instead of treating his father with some kind of respect, he treated his father like he was the victim." But I think this is an interesting point of like, oh, you need to teach respect to your elders, to your parents. And I think it is really kind of missing the human aspect of this book. It is this wasn't a perfect person writing this book. He was someone who had his own kind of neuroticism, his own difficult relationship with his father, and you really, you know, we use the word intergenerational trauma a lot. I think this is a really kind of interesting case study in that. You have Art Spiegelman, and he talks about, we see his own struggles. We see his father. His father has his own struggles, not just in the Holocaust, but it is as a survivor. The things he does. He's neurotic. He does not seem like a mentally healthy person. And there's this really great story before the war happened, or before the Holocaust happens, where the father actually has to go join the Polish military because he'd been trained and he was a reservist. And they have an entire backstory where his father, so Art Spiegelman's grandfather, was in the Russian army. And he said it was so terrible, and the only way to get back out from Siberia was if you lost a certain number of teeth. So it was like pulling his own teeth out. And so when he had children, so when he had Art Spiegelman's father and his brother, he decided that they weren't going to go through the same thing. And so when it came time for them to go be inspected to see if they could be reservists for the Polish army, he actually starved them. And so he would only feed them like coffee and no water. He wouldn't let them sleep. He wouldn't let them eat enough for like months and months and months before they were reservists. And it actually works for the older brother, for Art Spiegelman's uncle, who does not end up being a reservist for the Polish military. But it doesn't work for the father, for Art Spiegelman's father. And they say, oh, you're healthy, just eat some more food and come back in a year. And so the father, the grandfather that is, wanted to repeat the process with the father. He's like, nah, I'm not going through that hell again. I will take my chances with the Polish army. So he goes, he becomes a Polish reserve fighter, and then when they go to war with Germany, he's called back into the war. And I thought there's this really interesting, just 3 generations back of all this like horrible trauma and chains of treating each other in a way they thought was good, in a way they thought would help prepare their children for the future, but really kind of damaged them. And I think it is important to show how someone might have a very damaged relationship with their father who is, deeply traumatized. But also just in general, you don't have to have a perfect relationship with your father. People are humans, and we don't have to have perfect people in our fiction. So the next thing Mike Cochran says is, he's talking about how we can teach children history. He said, we can tell them exactly what happened, but we don't need all the nakedness and all the other stuff. And I think that's just wrong. We can tell people facts, but we can't really tell them what happened. I think the thing about the Holocaust is it is kind of unimaginable in scale. It's incomprehensible. Imagine this, or more than, millions of people who just killed, treated horribly. Not even just the people who died, but all the people who had their life so profoundly changed in a bunch of different ways. And you can give people facts, but I think to really make them understand, you have to see it more localized. It really does help to have one person's perspective. And it's obviously it's very limiting, when we hear about this one, like, rich Jewish guy's perspective, we don't hear about, like, the woman with the disability, or the communist, or any of the other Jews who maybe weren't as rich, or maybe the people who had a different survival strategy. And so it is really hard, and obviously you never hear the stories directly from the people who died. But I think by limiting the scope, it opens you up to really kind of understand it more as a human event, as something that actually happened to someone in their actual life. And it makes it, not that you can put yourself in someone's shoes so easily, but it does make it a little bit easier to imagine what happened. And I think all of the nakedness and all the other stuff is important. So the scene, the picture they're talking about with the naked woman is Art Spiegelman's mother who killed herself. And she cut herself in the bathtub. And I think that is important to talk about, because it wasn't just like you survived and then it was over. And so Mike Cochran doesn't just have a problem with mouse. He has a problem with the entire 8th and 7th grade curriculum. And he says, he's always getting these questions about text. And he says there's this poem in the 7th grade class that's just too much. and he wants to read it. He says they can fire him, but he's going to read it anyways. And this is the poem. I'm just wild about Harry, and Harry's wild about me. The heavenly blessings of his kisses fill me with ecstasy. He's sweet just like chocolate candy, just like honey from the bee. Oh, I'm just wild about Harry, and he's just wild about me. And so he has a problem with that poem because it contains the word ecstasy, which is apparently too risque of a word for 12-year-olds. And so Mike Hawken goes on to say, if I was trying to indoctrinate somebody's kid, this is how I would do it. You put this stuff in, just on the edges, so the parents don't catch it, but the kids, they soak it in, I think. We need to look at the entire curriculum. And so I really have to wonder, indoctrinate in what? You know, what is the thing that happens when a 13-year-old reads a graphic novel and they see 2 or 3 bad words used 8 times in the entirety of the book, and they have one image of a woman? I'm going to show you the image. What are they being indoctrinated in? What is the ideology? What is the end goal? Who is trying to do it? It feels almost kind of a paranoid response to just basic human art. And so, of course, it isn't just about mouse. Rob Schemblin, another person in this meeting, goes on to say, so we can take it as far as it needs to go, because I don't know that it's going to end with one book. I think the process needs to include a bigger plan to holistically redact things that we don't want in there. We hope we have good employees, like-minded culture, centric, I think it's meant to be like-minded culture-centric folks, that transcription isn't great, that fit in with McMillan County, that they're going to make the right distressingly decisions to redact that literature in an appropriate way for the age-related presentation. So it's not just this book. I think it's a deeper problem with the relationship to art and how they think we should teach about art. And they really go all in on this. Rob Schemblin continues, but surely removing the full 4 letters of a 4-letter word doesn't change the intent of the author's whole book. It just cleans it up. And there's something I found really disturbing about reading that. It's like, this book is imperfect, and it needs to be a little cleaner. You know, it's dirty. If you just get rid of the bad words when talking about the Holocaust, when talking about difficult relationships, everything's just fine and dandy, and it almost feels like we read 2 different books. They go on to kind of enter this conversation about, you know, what other books they might have to ban at a similar level of scrutiny, and they say basically that's another problem for another day. But also, there is a policy that a parent could just refuse to let their kid read a book on the curriculum. That's just a thing the school board has, which really does make me wonder if a parent could look at this and say, oh, this is just too much for my dear darling, and then the kid wouldn't read it, the kid would do something else. Why does the school board really feel the need to take it upon themselves to interfere in that decision, which has already been cleared up by the state, is approved by the teacher, and is approved by the parents? Why are they kind of putting themselves in there? Why are they canceling this book? And it really is such an interesting book because there are so many feelings. You know, I think if you read Mouse and you don't object to anything in it, you might have read it wrong, because it shows people how they are, and a lot of people did get offended by this. You know, it shows the father being racist, which I thought was, you know, a really interesting decision. I mean, it's the truth. He's just showing the truth. You can survive the Holocaust or genocide based on your ethnicity, come to another country, and then in this case the United States, and still develop a prejudice against another group of people based on their race. In this case, black people. It shows that. Some people thought the decision to show people as animals was really harmful. They thought that having all the Americans as dogs was bad because there is a racial distinction that they're just kind of ignoring. Or some people felt that it legitimized the actual racist like Nazi division, like they were separate species. And the book does kind of grapple with all these things in interesting ways. So it shows, the dogs, the Americans of different races. It depicts his wife is a mouse, even though she had converted to Judaism. And so he actually, in this book, he joked about, like maybe having her start off as a frog because she was French, and then just magically, when they have the conversion, she becomes a mouse. It shows people pretending to be members of other races. So sometimes when a Jew is pretending to be a Pole, they'll have like this little pig mask. Some people thought it was really offensive to portray the Poles as pigs because they're not kosher, so it's very much, I think interpreted by some people at least, is kind of insulting. Some people thought the Poles kind of more generally had a negative representation, where a lot of times they do help the Jews, but always for their own personal benefit. But I thought it was just real. It was people in a horrible situation just doing whatever they could to survive and make the most of it. And that's just the thing that happened. And this is such an important book. It's such an important thing to think about and to consider. And it's not just because it's what happened. And I don't want to say like this is what we could do tomorrow, because I think one of the things we should take away from the Second World War is the Germans were not a particularly evil people. It's not like they had something bad in their genetics that made them monsters. They were normal people who did monstrous things, which means normal people are capable of doing monstrous things. Just as we saw normal people rise to the occasion of great danger and become kind of heroes, we saw people do the opposite. When in a terrible situation they became monsters. But I don't want to say that, we're just like one day away from, exactly repeating World War II. World War II, the Holocaust, as it happened in World War II, will never happen again. That's just not how history works. But there is a great saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think that is something we should think about moving forward. We should look through these rhymes in history where horrible things have happened and great things have happened. And we really should wonder, how am I acting in relation to those things? So this book might have been written with a vocabulary a child could understand, but I still learned 3 words. So there's hosiery, like pantyhose is in kind of undergarment. I think there was like a hosiery fabric factory or something. There's combinator, which is someone who's like a schemer or like a snake oil salesman, someone who like lies to you. And there's kappa, which was a Jewish person who was, interned into the concentration camp and worked and kind of snitched on the other Jews in order to gain favor with the Nazis, or some kind of, material gain. And so if you'd like to talk some about The Great Gatsby, you can do that over here. But don't forget to give me a like before you go. Now, good night, good day, good potato.